The wind howled across the vast plains like a lonely spirit searching for something lost. The sun was only a pale memory behind the dense, rolling clouds of dust that had gathered in the horizon, promising another relentless afternoon under the unforgiving prairie sky. In the small, weather-beaten town of Red Canyon, little Emily clutched her worn-out bonnet tightly, her knuckles white against the rough fabric. The dirt path she ran along was full of stones and forgotten wagon tracks, but she barely felt the pain in her small, aching feet. All that mattered was getting to the one person who could help them. The giant rancher, Thomas Big Tom Hollister, a man whose name alone carried the weight of both fear and respect across the county. "They've beaten my mama," Emily screamed, her tiny voice cracking under the weight of despair. "She is dying." The words tore through the sleepy town like a gunshot at midnight. Townsfolk peeked out from shuttered windows and creaking doors, their faces etched with curiosity, concern, and fear. No one dared approach the little girl. Not even Sheriff Brennan, whose usual courage faltered before the raw urgency in Emily's eyes. It wasn't just any child standing there. It was a child whose innocence was trembling on the brink of tragedy, demanding action that could not wait for protocols or investigations. Big Tom Hollister, whose ranch sprawled across hundreds of acres on the edge of the canyon, had earned his nickname not just for his size but for the magnitude of his presence. When he walked into a room, it wasn't just noticed, it was felt. The townsfolk often said the wind seemed to shift when he moved. The rancher had broad shoulders, a chest as wide as the barn doors he built, and a stare that could flatten even the boldest outlaw. Yet beneath that intimidating exterior, there was a heart tempered by hard work, love for his animals, and a stubborn sense of justice. He was in the middle of inspecting a broken fence line when Emily came barreling down the path, her cries piercing the quiet afternoon. Tom dropped the heavy wooden post he was lifting, the splintered wood clattering to the ground, startling his horses. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed the scene. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, her face streaked with tears and dirt, shaking with fear and urgency. "Emily?" he called, his voice low but strong. "Big Tom," she cried, collapsing into his arms. They came to our cabin. "They hurt Mama, please help." The words struck him like a rifle shot to the chest. Tom's mind raced. He had always known the land could be cruel, that men could be crueler. He had fought cattle rustlers, defended his neighbors from marauding outlaws, and faced the harsh wilderness more times than he could count. Yet nothing in his years of hardship had prepared him for the terror he saw reflected in Emily's young eyes. Without a word, he lifted her in his massive arms, ignoring the small protests of her struggles. He strode toward the Hollister ranch house, each step purposeful, the dust from the path curling around his boots like smoke from a fire yet unseen. The girl's sobs echoed through the canyon, mingling with the cries of hawks circling above, creating a haunting symphony of dread and hope. The cabin door opened with a groan. Inside, the scene was far worse than anyone could imagine. Martha, Emily's mother, lay on the cold wooden floor, her dress torn, bruises forming on her pale arms, her face a mask of pain that could break even the toughest man. She tried to lift her head when she heard Tom's footsteps, but her strength failed her. "Hold her still, Emily," Tom said gently, lowering her to the floor beside her mother. He dropped to his knees, examining Martha's injuries with a practiced eye. There were signs of a struggle, bruises from fists and boots, a bloodied hem where someone had yanked her roughly. "Who did this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that filled the room. Emily shook her head violently, tears falling freely. I don't know. They wore masks. I tried to fight them off." Tom's fists clenched. Rage simmered beneath the surface, controlled but ready to erupt. "We'll make sure they pay for this," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Then with sudden decisiveness, he lifted Martha into his arms. She winced but did not cry out, too weak to protest. "I'm taking you home," he said. "We'll patch you up and you'll be safe. No one will ever hurt you again." As he carried her outside, Emily ran alongside, her small hand gripping his massive sleeve. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretched across the prairie like the fingers of some ancient guardian. Tom knew time was critical. Infection, shock, and the harsh environment could all conspire against Martha's survival. He urged his horse forward, carefully mounting Martha while Emily climbed onto the back behind her. The trio rode swiftly, the sound of pounding hooves a drumbeat against the quiet of the evening. The journey back to the Hollister ranch was fraught with tension. Every gust of wind, every snapping twig in the distance made Emily cry out in fear. Tom spoke little, focusing on the path ahead, But when he did, it was with a calm certainty meant to reassure. "We're almost there," he said. "You're safe now. Nothing's going to harm you again." Upon reaching the ranch, Tom laid Martha on a makeshift bed in the barn, surrounded by blankets, lanterns, and the warm scent of hay. He cleaned her wounds with water and alcohol salvaged from the barn's storage, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Emily hovered nearby, brushing stray strands of hair from her mother's face, whispering apologies for not stopping the attackers. "It's not your fault, Emily," Tom said, kneeling beside her. "You were brave. Braver than most grown men I know." The girl's eyes widened, a flicker of pride breaking through the fear. Through the night, Tom kept watch. He nursed the fires, fetched water, and spoke softly to Martha and Emily, weaving stories of the ranch, of the prairie, of the courage it took to survive the Wild West. The three of them became an unlikely family in those hours, bonded not by blood but by the raw experience of shared trauma and the promise of protection. Outside, the winds of Red Canyon whistled a mournful tune. The stars glimmered coldly in the vast sky, distant and indifferent to human suffering. Yet within the barn there was warmth, safety, and a glimmer of hope. Tom's mind, however, was already racing ahead. The men who had attacked Martha were still out there. They had to be found. Justice had to be served. The law here was slow and often corrupt. Sometimes the only justice the frontier offered was the one a man delivered with his own hands. The next morning, Emily awoke to the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee brewing in the barn kitchen. She found her mother awake, wrapped in thick blankets, bruises slowly fading under careful treatment. Tom stood nearby, a rifle slung across his broad shoulders, eyes scanning the horizon as if daring trouble to come near. "We have to find them," Tom said quietly, his voice carrying a steely resolve. "And when we do, they'll learn why no one in Red Canyon crosses the Hollister Ranch." Martha reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it. "We're lucky," she whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. "Lucky to have Big Tom." Emily smiled weakly, hope beginning to replace the terror. "He's more than lucky. He's our hero." Tom glanced at them both, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It was a rare softness in a man who had spent decades wielding power and protection like a shield. Yet beneath that calm, the fire of justice burned bright. The plains were vast and danger was never far. But for tonight at least, the Hollister Ranch had become a sanctuary, and for Emily and her mother, that sanctuary was all that mattered. As the sun climbed higher over the prairie, promises of revenge and redemption began to stir in Tom's mind. He would not rest until the men who brought violence to a small cabin were brought to account. The story of little Emily, her mother, and the giant rancher was just beginning. The plains would whisper of their courage, the townsfolk would murmur about the Hollister's justice, and the winds of Red Canyon would carry the tale of a little girl, a wounded mother, and a man who would not stand idly by. It was a tale of survival, of love, and of the kind of justice only the Wild West could demand. A story that would echo across the prairie for years to come. The dawn broke over Red Canyon with a pale, uncertain light, spilling gold and gray across the rough prairie. The air was crisp, almost painfully so, carrying with it the sense of dry earth, sagebrush, and the faint tang of livestock that had begun stirring in the Hollister Ranch corrals. Emily's small hands clutched the edge of the rough wooden bed, where her mother still lay weak and bruised, each breath a shiver of pain and resilience. Tom Hollister had stayed up most of the night, pacing the barn floor, listening for the whisper of danger in the distance, checking the horizon for signs of movement that could herald the return of the men who had attacked Martha. His sleep had been fragmented, filled with dreams of violence and vengeance, but also with the faint, delicate hope that life might still hold beauty amidst such cruelty. "How do you feel, Mama?" Emily asked softly, her voice trembling between hope and fear. The little girl's hair hung in wisps around her face, tangled from sleep and worry, and her eyes were swollen from crying. Martha tried to smile, a thin, fragile thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Better? Because we have Tom," she whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. He's like a giant angel, Emily. He won't let anyone hurt us again." Tom emerged from the barn's shadows, brushing hay from his worn coat, his boots scuffing the wooden floor. He carried the weight of the plains in his broad shoulders, and the authority of a man who had weathered more storms than most could imagine. Yet beneath that strength lay the tenderness he reserved only for those who could not defend themselves. He knelt beside Martha and Emily, his gaze steady and unwavering. "We can't let what happened yesterday define us," he said. The prairie is harsh and men are cruel, but you're not alone. We'll face whatever comes together. And those men, whoever they are, they'll regret ever crossing this land or hurting anyone under my watch." Emily's small hand found his enormous one, gripping it tightly as though drawing courage from his presence. "But how will we stop them, Big Tom?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "First we survive," he said firmly. "Then we find them. Justice isn't fast, Emily, but it's always worth the wait. We'll prepare. We'll be ready." The day unfolded slowly, each hour marked by careful attention to Martha's recovery. Tom showed a patience that few could claim to possess. He cleaned wounds, boiled water for herbal compresses, and spoke gently to both mother and daughter, sharing stories of the ranch, the animals, and even tales of outlaws he had faced and bested. His stories were vivid and raw, filled with danger and triumph, painting a world of harsh lessons and unexpected kindness. Through these narratives, Emily found a sense of normalcy, her laughter flickering like fragile sunlight through the barn's open doors. Yet beneath the quiet routine, the shadow of vengeance loomed. Tom knew the attackers could return at any time. Emboldened by their previous success, he decided to visit the town, seeking information and allies while ensuring the women remained safe. Mounting his horse, he adjusted the rifle strapped to the saddle, his eyes scanning the horizon with the focus of a predator who knew the land's every curve and concealment. Emily watched him go, worry etched deep into her features while Martha's hand lingered in hers, a silent prayer for his safe return. The town itself was a mixture of dust, decay, and determination. Wooden buildings leaned on each other as though supporting their shared burdens, and the streets carried the aroma of fresh bread, livestock, and hard labor. Tom approached the sheriff's office first, though he did so with caution. Brennan, a man of middling courage, looked up from his ledger, a glimmer of hope and unease crossing his face when he saw Tom. "Morning, Sheriff," Tom said, voice calm yet commanding. "I need to find some men. They attacked a woman and her daughter. Masks, weapons, no mercy." Sheriff Brennan's brow furrowed. I'll see what I can do, Hollister, but these men, they're clever. They don't leave trails easy to follow." "Then we'll make our own trail," Tom replied, a quiet edge to his tone that spoke volumes. "Justice waits for no man when a child and her mother suffer. I'll do what you can't or won't." As he walked the streets, questions followed him. Neighbors watched from porches, some whispering warnings, others offering small pieces of information. Sightings of suspicious men, wagons moving at odd hours, the faint echoes of whispers that spoke of hidden hideouts in the canyon's shadows. Every clue, every scrap of information added fuel to Tom's resolve. He was no stranger to danger. The West had shaped him into both protector and avenger. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Emily and Martha worked to regain a semblance of normalcy. Emily helped with the small chores she could manage, her tiny hands feeding chickens and carrying water, while Martha tended to the garden, her strength returning slowly. Yet the fear lingered, an invisible thread pulling tight at every sound in the wind, every shadow across the barn floor. At night, Martha whispered to Emily about courage, teaching her that bravery wasn't the absence of fear but the will to face it, even when trembling. As days passed, Tom's investigation uncovered more troubling truths. The men who had attacked Martha were part of a gang that had terrorized the region for months, striking at vulnerable families, demanding money, or worse. The gang's leader, a man known as Garrett the Viper McKinley, was notorious for his cruelty and cunning. Tom realized that confronting them directly would be dangerous, but inaction was not an option. The women's lives and the fragile sense of security at the Hollister Ranch depended on it. One evening, as the sun bled crimson into the horizon, Tom returned to the ranch. The horses were restless, the barn quiet but heavy with anticipation. He dismounted silently, his eyes taking in the gentle sway of the wheat, the soft glow of lanterns, and the tired but hopeful faces of Martha and Emily. "We're going to have to fight smart," Tom said, his voice low and steady. "We can't rush blindly into the canyon. They're clever and desperate men are dangerous. But we'll find them. We'll protect ourselves. And Emily, we'll make sure your mama never suffers like this again." Emily's eyes shone with a mixture of fear and determination. "We'll help, Big Tom," she whispered. "We'll be brave too." Tom knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her dirt-streaked face. "Bravery comes in many forms, little one. Yours is staying strong and believing that good men still walk this earth. That's more than enough." As night fell over Red Canyon, the wind carried whispers of coming storms, both in the weather and in the hearts of men, somewhere in the shadows. Garrett McKinley and his gang prepared, unaware that the Hollister Ranch was no longer a target of opportunity but a fortress of resolve. The quiet before the storm settled over the prairie, the tension thick and unyielding. Emily and her mother rested, hearts clinging to hope, while Tom planned, calculated, and steeled himself for the inevitable confrontation. The Wild West had never been forgiving, but here in the heart of Red Canyon a story of courage, love, and unshakable justice was unfolding. The little girl who had cried for help, her mother who had endured unspeakable pain, and the giant rancher whose strength and heart were unmatched. Together, they would face whatever the prairie and its menacing shadows could throw at them. The horizon held danger, but also the promise of redemption, and Tom Hollister, giant of the plains and guardian of the helpless, would not rest until the balance of justice was restored. The dawn rose over Red Canyon with a restless wind, tugging at loose boards, rattling shutters, and stirring the scent of dust, hay, and wild sage. Emily awoke before the sun fully claimed the sky. Her small body curled beneath the woolen blankets, the echoes of fear from the past days still clinging to her dreams. She glanced at her mother, whose bruised arms and weary eyes told the story of a night that had seemed endless. And yet, against all odds, she had survived. The little girl's gaze fell on Tom Hollister, who had spent another night awake, sitting near the barn door with his rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the canyon horizon, alert to every sound. He looked enormous even in the dim morning light, the kind of man who seemed carved from the very rocks of the plains, yet his presence carried a warmth that belied his size. "Good morning, little one," Tom said, his deep voice breaking the silence. "How's my brave helper today?" Emily tried to smile, but it faltered. "I'm scared, Big Tom." "What if they come back?" Tom leaned down, resting a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll meet them, but not with fear. We'll meet them with courage. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Emily. It's standing tall even when your heart pounds." Martha, now slowly recovering, rose from her makeshift bed. Her movements were cautious, each step measured to avoid pain. Yet the fire in her eyes had returned. "We need to be ready," she said, voice steady despite lingering weakness. "They won't give up so easily. Men like those never do." Tom nodded, already planning. The previous days had revealed the men's ruthlessness, but also their patterns. He had scouted the nearby canyons, noted hidden gullies, and memorized every bend and brush where an ambush could be staged. The Hollister Ranch had become more than a refuge. It was now a fortress of strategy with Tom at its heart, both protector and general. As the sun climbed higher, the prairie shimmered under its relentless light, a landscape both beautiful and deadly. Tom prepared for the inevitable confrontation. He sharpened knives, cleaned his pistols, and reinforced weak points around the barn. Emily and Martha watched, a mixture of fascination and fear in their eyes. The little girl, sensing the gravity of the moment, clung to her mother's skirts, feeling the tension crackling through the air like static before a storm. By mid-afternoon, signs of danger became impossible to ignore. Distant dust clouds rose near the canyon's edge, flickering in and out of sight with every gust of wind. Tom's eyes narrowed, calculating. "They're coming," he said almost quietly, as if speaking louder might summon the menace closer. The gang was approaching, riding hard, the horse hooves pounding the earth like war drums. Emily buried her face in her mother's chest, her small body shaking, yet Tom's presence grounded her, a promise that she would not face the threat alone. The gang emerged from the canyon shadows. Garrett, the Viper McKinley at the lead, his dark eyes glinting with cruelty, flanked by rough men whose faces were hardened by crime and disregard for life. They were armed and confident, having terrorized families for months, and they expected the Hollister Ranch to crumble before them as so many others had. What they didn't know was that Tom Hollister was not like the ordinary men they had encountered. He was a giant of the plains, a force honed by years of survival and hard-won justice. "Halt," Tom called, his voice booming across the dusty field. "You're on my land. You've hurt women and children. It stops now." Garrett sneered, the twisted curl of his mustache catching the sun. "We only took what we wanted, Hollister." "Ain't none of your business. Move aside or we'll teach your little angels a lesson too." Tom's jaw tightened. The rage simmering beneath his calm exterior was now a roaring fire. He stepped fully into view, massive and immovable, his rifle poised. "You'll get nothing but justice. Leave now and no more blood will spill. Stay and you'll regret it for the rest of your lives." The tension stretched taut. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Emily clung to her mother, hiding behind a barrel, eyes wide as she witnessed the standoff. Martha's hand trembled on her daughter's shoulder, but her gaze remained fixed on Tom, a mixture of fear, awe, and hope. She knew the fight was not just for property or pride. It was for their very lives, for survival in a world that could be merciless. And then, the first shot rang out, a warning, intended to intimidate. Tom fired back, precise and controlled, aiming not to kill recklessly but to assert dominance. The gang scattered, taking cover behind rocks and their horses, underestimating the cunning and strength of the man before them. The battle that followed was chaotic, dust and gunpowder mingling in the air, the sound of gunfire echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Tom moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, his rifle and pistols working in unison, his experience on the prairie evident in every shot and maneuver. Yet this was more than physical skill. It was strategy, anticipation, and moral resolve. He knew every shot could save or cost a life. Emily watched from the barn, clutching her mother's hand, her heart pounding as each report of the gun echoed in the hollow spaces of her chest. She saw the fire in Tom's eyes, a fire that was fierce yet controlled, protecting what he loved rather than seeking mindless vengeance. Hours passed like this, the sun arcing toward its zenith, shadows lengthening. The gang was relentless, but so was Tom. Finally, Garrett McKinley, enraged and desperate, charged toward the barn with a knife glinting in the sunlight. Tom met him at the doorway, rifle trained and steady. The confrontation was brutal yet swift. Garrett underestimated the giant rancher's strength and resolve. Within moments he was disarmed, pinned, and facing the inevitable consequence of his actions. Tom looked down at him, the weight of justice heavy in his gaze. "This ends now," he said, his voice low and uncompromising. Garrett's sneer faltered. He had terrorized towns and families for months, yet here, before the Hollister Ranch, he faced a man whose courage and morality were as vast as the plains themselves. The other gang members, seeing their leader captured and outmatched, retreated into the canyon shadows, leaving the Hollister Ranch in an uneasy peace. Emily ran to Tom, throwing herself into his broad arms, sobbing with relief. Martha followed, holding her daughter tightly, whispering thanks and prayers. Tom looked at them, chest heaving, hands still steady despite the adrenaline. "You're safe now," he said, voice softening for the first time in hours. "No one will harm you again, not while I stand here." As night fell, Red Canyon was quiet once more. The stars glimmered coldly over the prairie, distant witnesses to the courage and love that had unfolded below. Inside the barn, Emily and Martha rested, exhausted but alive, their hearts full of gratitude and newfound courage. Tom kept a vigil, knowing the West was never truly tame, but for now, he allowed himself the rare comfort of hope. The Hollister Ranch had endured the storm, but the days ahead promised more challenges, moral choices, survival struggles, and the unfolding complexities of human hearts in a harsh and beautiful land. Yet one thing was certain. Courage, love, and justice had triumphed today, and the bond between the little girl, her mother, and the giant rancher had grown stronger than ever. The prairie morning broke with a gentle haze, the sun spilling molten gold across the Hollister Ranch, casting long, fragile shadows that flickered like memories over the earth. The wind whispered through the wheat fields, carrying with it the scent of wild sage, dry soil, and a faint trace of smoke from the barn's hearth. Emily sat near the door, small fingers clutching a chipped mug of milk, eyes tracing the horizon where the first tendrils of sunlight met the rugged canyon walls. Her mother, Martha, moved slowly about the barn, gathering eggs and tending to chores, her bruises fading but leaving behind a memory of pain etched deep into her posture. The air was calm, but both women felt the quiet tension that lingered after yesterday's confrontation, the kind of vigilance that never quite leaves a family who has faced real danger. Tom Hollister, as always, was already awake. He stood near the fence line, surveying his land with a practiced gaze, rifle slung over his broad shoulders. His face, weathered by sun and wind, carried both determination and a faint shadow of something softer, reserved for the quiet moments away from the prying eyes of the prairie. He had endured countless storms, both from nature and from men, but the bond forming between him, Martha, and Emily stirred unfamiliar emotions. In the heat of battle he had protected them. In the stillness of dawn he found himself wanting more than just survival. He wanted connection, safety, and perhaps even love, though admitting it would be a test of courage far different from facing an outlaw's gun. "Good morning," Emily said, her small voice carrying across the yard. Tom turned, offering a rare smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "Morning, little one," he replied. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as I can," she said, her gaze drifting to her mother. "Mama's getting better." Martha stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against Tom's arm. "Thanks to you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We wouldn't have made it without you. Not just yesterday, but for everything before that, too." Tom's gaze met hers, and for a fleeting moment, the vast silence of the prairie seemed to shrink, leaving only the three of them and an unspoken understanding. He shifted, scratching at the nape of his neck, a gesture that betrayed the rare vulnerability beneath his imposing exterior. "It's my job," he said simply, but the weight behind the words carried something more profound. A promise, a warning, and a hope all at once. The day passed slowly, each hour marked by the rhythms of ranch life, mending fences, feeding animals, fetching water from the well. Yet beneath these routines, tension simmered like the coals of a hidden fire. The threat of Garrett McKinley's gang had not vanished. They had retreated, but only to regroup. Tom knew the plains were vast and outlaws had long memories. He began to train both mother and daughter in basic survival skills. Not weapons, not violence, but caution, awareness, and the strength that comes from knowing how to defend oneself in the Wild West. "Emily," Tom said as he handed her a small leather pouch containing water and dried meat, "you need to know how to handle yourself. Fear is natural, but it shouldn't paralyze you. The prairie can be cruel, but it can also teach us strength." Emily nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on her small shoulders. "I want to help, Big Tom. I don't want anyone to get hurt again." Her words struck Tom with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She was only a child, yet she carried courage beyond her years, a reflection of her mother's resilience and the harsh lessons of frontier life. Martha watched the exchange, her heart swelling with admiration and worry. She could see the bond forming, not just protection, but trust, loyalty, and perhaps something deeper. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet, Tom found himself alone near the barn, watching the horizon. The wind carried a hint of smoke, distant and deliberate. He recognized the sign immediately. Scouts, sent by Garrett McKinley to gauge the Hollister Ranch's defenses. Tom's jaw tightened. The confrontation he had hoped might be over was far from finished. Yet amidst the tension, he felt a strange calm. He had a plan, and he would face the threat on his terms. Martha appeared beside him quietly, her presence both grounding and unnerving. "Tom," she said softly, "you don't have to do this alone. I know you've handled them before, but—" Her voice faltered slightly. "We care for you. Emily cares for you. I do too. We want to help, even if it's just being here for you." Tom looked down at her, startled by the honesty in her words. He had lived a life defined by solitude, measured by the battles he fought and the land he protected. But this connection, this fragile warmth, was something entirely different. "I am not sure how to do that," he admitted quietly. "I've spent my life relying on strength and survival. Letting someone in, that's harder than any fight I've faced." Martha reached for his hand, the simple touch carrying a depth of emotion that neither words nor guns could convey. "Then start small," she said. "Let us in. Let us be part of this life, not just the danger, but the moments in between. We're stronger together than apart." The tension of unspoken emotions hung in the air, mingling with the scent of the prairie and the faint crackle of the barn fire. Tom's eyes softened, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond constant vigilance. A life where protection was intertwined with love, and strength was measured not just by fists or firearms, but by the courage to care. Night fell fully, and the stars emerged like scattered diamonds over the prairie. Emily slept soundly, exhausted from a day filled with both hope and fear. Martha rested nearby, finally feeling the weight of her injuries lift enough to allow some comfort. Tom remained awake, gazing at the horizon, planning, watching, protecting, and slowly opening his heart. The Hollister Ranch, for the first time, was more than a fortress. It was a home, and yet beyond the canyon, the threat of Garrett McKinley's gang still loomed like a storm gathering at the edge of the world. Tom knew the coming days would demand courage, strategy, and perhaps the ultimate test of the bonds forming between him, Martha, and Emily. The prairie whispered promises of danger and redemption, of love and survival, of choices that could shape their lives forever. And for the giant rancher, the little girl, and her recovering mother, the story was far from over. The next chapter would demand not just strength but heart, and the willingness to fight for something beyond mere survival. A life worth living. Together. The prairie was alive with a restless energy, the kind that set the wheat trembling and made the horses stamp uneasily in the corrals. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when Tom Hollister was already moving. Rifle in hand, boots sinking into the cold, damp earth. Yesterday's peace had been a fragile thing, shattered by whispers carried on the wind. Rumors that Garrett McKinley's gang had regrouped, more dangerous and desperate than before. Tom's instincts, honed over decades of harsh winters, lawless towns, and battles with men who had no conscience, told him this confrontation would be different, more cunning, more violent. Inside the barn, Martha stirred quietly, her movements still cautious as she assessed her own strength. She had recovered enough to walk without support, but the memory of yesterday's terror lingered, a shadow over every careful step. She glanced at Emily, who was awake and peeking through the barn door, eyes wide with anticipation and fear. "Stay close," Martha whispered, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. "Whatever happens, we face it together. We have Tom." Emily nodded, swallowing her fear, yet even in her small frame there was a budding courage. She had witnessed bravery firsthand, the courage of a giant rancher who refused to let evil triumph. She understood, even at her tender age, that true strength was not measured by size alone, but by the willingness to protect, to endure, and to stand against overwhelming odds. Tom returned to the barn, his face grim, the lines of worry softened only by a rare flicker of tenderness as he looked at the two women. "They're planning to strike tonight," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We can't just wait for them. We have to be ready. And we're not alone, we have each other. Emily, your courage matters. Martha, your resilience matters. Together, we're stronger than they are." The day stretched on in tense preparation. Tom reinforced the barn's defenses, stacking hay bales and securing doors while Martha and Emily gathered supplies, water, lanterns, and provisions for what could be a long, harrowing night. Tom showed them how to listen to the land. The subtle shift of wind, the distant scrape of hooves, the whisper of branches. Every sense was a weapon, every observation a shield. As the sun dipped low behind the canyon, casting long shadows over the ranch, the first signs of trouble appeared. Dust swirled in the distance, the telltale shimmer of approaching horses, silhouettes emerging from the canyon's darkened crevices. Tom's heart remained steady, though adrenaline surged, muscles coiled for action. This was no ordinary raid, it was a reckoning. Garrett McKinley, cunning and ruthless, would not retreat a second time. He had tasted the Hollister Ranch's strength and intended to conquer it, whatever the cost. "Remember what I taught you," Tom whispered to Martha and Emily, his massive hand resting on each of their shoulders. "Fear is natural, but it won't control us. Courage is what we do in spite of fear." Emily nodded, gripping her mother's hand tightly. Martha's gaze met Tom's, a mixture of trust, admiration, and something unspoken stirring between them, the bond that had grown through shared danger. Sleepless nights and quiet moments of care now flickered with an unfamiliar, tender warmth. In the shadow of imminent battle, the heart demanded attention even amidst chaos. The gang arrived just as night fully claimed the prairie, a dozen men silhouetted against the dimming sky, faces shadowed beneath hats, weapons glinting in the moonlight. Garrett led the charge, a cruel smile playing across his lips. "Hollister," he called, voice carrying across the fields, "we gave you a chance. Now it ends. Your little angels won't see another sunrise." Tom stepped forward, imposing and unyielding. "They're not yours to threaten," he said evenly. "If you come one step closer, you'll learn why the Hollister Ranch doesn't bow to men like you." The first shot rang out, piercing the night. Dust kicked up as bullets struck the earth around the barn. Tom moved with a terrifying efficiency, each shot precise, aimed to protect rather than to kill recklessly, yet every swing of his rifle carried the force of a man who had endured loss and hardship enough to understand the cost of hesitation. The gang scattered using cover, returning fire sporadically, but none could match the giant's reach or resolve. Inside the barn, Martha and Emily stayed low, but Tom had prepared them. They listened, watched, and absorbed the rhythm of survival, the careful timing of steps, the subtle sounds of movement, the split-second decisions that meant life or death. Emily's small hands trembled, yet she understood the purpose of courage, and Martha's heart swelled with both worry and awe at the way the giant rancher protected them. The confrontation intensified, Garrett desperate, attempted to flank the barn, his men following. Tom anticipated the move, stepping into the open briefly, drawing the attacker's focus, then retreating with precision, luring them into traps of his own making. Hidden pitfalls, reinforced gates, and lines of fire that forced the gang to scatter and expose themselves. One by one, the outlaws faltered. The tide of battle, though chaotic, began to favor the Hollister ranch. In the heat of the moment, something extraordinary happened. Martha, driven by both fear and love, helped guide Emily through a hidden side door, her calm voice directing the little girl while Tom engaged the gang. The sight of the mother-daughter duo working together despite the terror around them struck Tom with a profound sense of admiration and affection. It was not merely survival. It was connection, resilience, and a testament to human strength. Finally, the confrontation reached its climax. Garrett, cornered near the barn, lunged recklessly, knife in hand. Tom met him head-on, grappling with the outlaw, strength against strength until Garrett lay disarmed and defeated, his threat neutralized. The remaining gang members, seeing their leader captured and beaten, retreated into the canyon, their morale shattered. The silence that followed was heavy, but full of relief. The prairie seemed to exhale, the wind slowing, the horses calming, and the stars casting a serene glow over the Hollister ranch. Emily ran to Tom, throwing herself into his broad arms, sobbing with relief and gratitude. Martha joined them, holding both tightly, whispering thanks and quiet words of love. Tom looked at them, chest heaving, the weight of battle settling into exhaustion, but tempered by pride. "You're safe," he said softly. "This land, this home, it belongs to us. No one will take it from you." The night carried a sense of fragile victory, yet Tom knew the plains would never truly be free of danger. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of rare peace, letting the bonds of love and trust wrap around him as the barn doors creaked in the wind and the prairie whispered of courage, resilience, and hope. The Hollister ranch had endured, stronger than before. The trials of fire and conflict had forged a connection deeper than fear, one built on mutual reliance, respect, and the budding promise of love between Tom and Martha, a bond that even the harshest Wild West could not break. The prairie awoke to a soft, golden light that spilled across the Hollister ranch like a blessing. The events of the previous nights, the gunfire, the fear, the adrenaline, felt almost dreamlike in the calm of dawn. Emily stirred first, her small body curled beneath the blankets she had taken to keeping close against the wind, eyes wide as she watched the sun paint the horizon. She had slept, but not without dreams haunted by shadows of the men who had terrorized her mother. Yet as she looked across the barn at the figure of Tom Hollister tending to the horses, a sense of calm settled over her. He was larger than life, steady as the canyon walls, a guardian against every danger the prairie could hold. Martha emerged slowly, her strength returned fully now, her bruises healed into faint memories that told a story of resilience and endurance. She approached Tom, whose hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, yet gentle as he brushed a tangle from her hair. The connection between them, forged in the fires of terror and trial, had deepened into something unspoken yet palpable. Trust, admiration, and the first flickers of love. The Hollister ranch, once merely a home and a refuge, had become a sanctuary not only of safety but of heart. "Tom," Martha said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet yard, "you've given us so much more than protection. You've given us hope. And for that She trailed off, her cheeks tinged with warmth. Tom met her gaze, his massive frame slightly hunched, not from weakness but from the enormity of emotion he rarely allowed himself to display. "Martha," he said, his voice low and steady, "you and Emily, you've shown me something I thought I'd never have. That life is more than survival, more than fighting off the men who'd harm us. It's about love, family, courage, even when the odds are against you." Emily, standing shyly behind her mother, felt a thrill of pride. Her small hands held onto both adults, the three of them forming a triangle of strength, love, and newfound security. "We're a family now," she said quietly, her words small but powerful, echoing across the barn and the fields beyond. Tom smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened his weathered features. "Yes, we are," he said. A promise and a vow rolled into two words. The sense of finality and yet beginning filled the air, the kind of quiet resolution that comes after storm and trial. But the Wild West is never fully tame. Tom had anticipated Garrett McKinley's final attempts at revenge. The outlaw had retreated into the hills, nursing wounds to both pride and body, and whispers from neighboring towns suggested he was gathering remnants of his gang for one last strike. Tom knew vigilance remained essential, but the immediacy of threat had passed, replaced by the luxury of planning for life rather than merely survival. He spent the morning reinforcing fences, checking supplies, and teaching Emily and Martha the nuances of prairie survival. Reading tracks, understanding weather patterns, and maintaining awareness without succumbing to fear. Every lesson was imbued with patience, love, and an awareness that they were no longer helpless, but participants in their own destiny. The afternoon brought visitors, neighbors who had heard of the gang's defeat and came to offer congratulations and aid. Tom greeted them with his usual measured calm, though pride warmed the deep timbre of his voice. Martha, once timid in public, now stood with poise, sharing her story of survival and courage. Emily's bright eyes sparkled as she recounted small heroics of the nights past, earning smiles and admiration from adults who recognized her bravery. The Hollister Ranch had become a symbol, not just of defense against danger, but of the resilience and moral fiber required to live in the unforgiving West. As dusk fell, the family gathered near the barn fire, the air cool and scented with wood smoke and sagebrush. Tom looked at Martha and Emily, heart swelling at the sense of completeness. The horizon glowed orange and violet, reflecting the promise of tomorrow. He spoke, voice carrying the calm authority of a man who had faced death and emerged stronger, tempered by love and human connection. We've survived storms, fought men who thought cruelty was strength, and endured nights that seemed endless. But we're still here, together, and that makes all the difference. Martha moved closer, resting her head on his broad shoulder. Emily nestled against them both, her small frame a symbol of the fragile yet enduring human spirit. The night settled over the prairie like a blanket, stars gleaming as distant witnesses to the story of courage, love, and justice that had unfolded below. Tom felt an unfamiliar weight lift from his shoulders, the weight of constant vigilance, replaced by the steady pulse of belonging. The final threat of Garrett McKinley, though lingering in whispers, no longer held the power it once did. Tom had restored balance, ensured the safety of those he cared for, and demonstrated that even in the Wild West, morality, courage, and love could prevail over greed and cruelty. The Hollister Ranch, standing firm against both human and natural adversities, became a beacon of hope for others who lived in fear of the lawless and cruel. As the fire crackled, Tom turned to Martha, voice soft yet steady. This life, it's harsh, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. But with you and Emily, I know it can also be full of joy, love, and hope. I can't promise the prairie will ever be easy, but I promise I'll stand by you always. Martha reached up, cupping his rugged face, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. And I'll stand by you, Tom, whatever comes. Together we're unstoppable. Emily, voice small but firm, added, and I'll be brave too, just like you, Big Tom. Tom laughed softly, ruffling her hair with giant hands. Then we're truly a family, he said, warmth filling every word. The Hollister Ranch had endured the storm of men, the cruelty of the prairie, and the trials of survival. Now it endured with laughter, love, and the steadfast courage that only true unity could provide. The prairie wind whispered through the fields, carrying with it a promise of tomorrow, of new beginnings, of the extraordinary bond between a little girl, her mother, and a giant rancher whose heart had grown as vast as the West itself. The Wild West had tested them all, but in the end it had also rewarded them, with justice, with survival, and with a family bound by courage, love, and unbreakable trust.